Good evening, everyone. My name is Jianying Shi. I'm the current board chair of Acting Chinese American Civic Society. First, I would like to thank Town of Acton manager, John Mangiati, I hope I say it correct, for co-organizing and hosting this forum. Thanks to all the speakers that accept our invitation and give a talk tonight. And thanks to all the Zoom audience who joined our meeting this evening. And before I start, I would like to give a few notes for the meeting. And John, if you could put to the next slide. So we are going to mute everyone. Only the speakers will be able to speak and you will hear the speaker. And you can enter questions to the Q&A during the speaker speech at any time. And so the organizers, we are going to collect your questions. And at the Q&A session, we are going to direct the questions to the specific speakers. Hope that will be clear to everyone. So next, please. So here I would like to give a brief introduction about ACACS. I don't know, some of you may have heard or may not heard about ACACS. And ACACS was established 4 years ago. It is a nonprofit organization. We have members mainly from Acton and surrounding towns. Next, please. So our goal and efforts are focused on the following 5 areas: promote civic engagement, serve communities through organizing volunteer activities, provide education forum like this one, enrich culture, and build community. Next, please. Here is an example that we create flyers, distribute, and encourage voting and participation in town events. Next. And here we have collaborated with Open Table for the past 3 years for Chinese New Year celebration and charity dinner. ACACS sponsored the dinner and our volunteers help to prepare the food and serve the food. Next, please. We also collaborated with Acton Historical Society for the education seminar about Acton history. Next, please. Here we collaborate with Town of Acton, ABCC, Friend of Arboretum, to build a beautiful China garden in Acton Arboretum. Many of you may have seen the red grid there. Next, please. A few months ago, at the start of COVID-19 crisis, ACACS act quickly. We collaborate with ACLS, Acton Chinese School. We collected $8,000 from donations, bought PPE, and distributed over 16,000 face masks to many different hospitals, senior houses, and local grocery stores. So why we initiate this forum? I can share with you some of my personal perspectives. I'm the first generation immigrant here. I came to United States 26 years ago. I raised my 2 children here in Acton. For the past couple of months, I had quite some discussion with my son and my daughter regarding George Floyd's incidents and what is happening across our nation. I heard from many of my Chinese friends that they had a similar conversation with their second generation. My daughter said to me, "Mom, do you know we live in Acton? It's like we are living in an ivory tower. The rest of the world is not the same as in Acton." So I have to say, I learned a lot from my children. They also encouraged me to learn more about American history and Black American history. As Chinese American, some of us may have faced racist discrimination during our lives, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic time. So here we would like to hear, listen, and learn from Black American movement. For Chinese community, how can we do better to fight against racism, injustice, hatred, and violence? And how can we contribute to build an inclusive and diversity community? That is our intention here for this forum. So now I would like to pass to our co-host, Acton Town Manager, John Mangiati, to start our panel discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jiayang. This is John Mangiati, the Town Manager in Acton. Jiayang and Don and the Acton Chinese Civic Society, this is an amazing work that you put together. They called me last week and said, we want to put together a forum, and it was an unbelievable group of people that you're going to hear from tonight, who they were able to invite and agree to come on the show. And it's going to be a great conversation. A lot of learning is going to happen tonight, and I'm honored to be part of it. I'm just here to help facilitate and help with the Q&A at the end, and I'm here to learn as well. So I'm really looking forward to all of our guests, and I have the pleasure of introducing our first guest, Kevin McCaskill. Kevin is the current director of the Madison Park Tech-Voc School in Boston. He's also worked in Springfield and in Hartford as an administrator in schools. He's in the Basketball Hall of Fame at Western New England College, which I noticed in his bio. And he's about to become part of the executive staff at Boston Public Schools. Moving, getting a promotion in Boston Public Schools. And we're really excited to have you here tonight, Kevin. And thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me this evening. It's truly an honor, and I am humbled. Excuse me. So John, if we could start with the slides, please. And my conversation tonight is equity in education, a brief, and when I say brief, a brief history of America's educational system as seen through the eyes, through the lens of equity. Next slide, please. When we talk about equity in education, what it is an educational system that ensures that it will meet the needs of students, and every student will have an equal opportunity to succeed. If there are obstacles or impediments that individual students or a certain demographic of students may have, the system will provide support to overcome those obstacles and impediments. Next slide, please. So when you're talking to understand the educational system, you got to, especially as it regards Black folks, you have to go to the beginning. The first Africans to step foot on American soil was in 1619 in Virginia, and we all know that marked the beginning of slavery. Now, from 1619 to 1865, believe it or not, it was deemed a criminal endeavor to educate slaves. So that meant there were just very few opportunities for Blacks to receive any type of education. And as we know that up north, obviously with the beginning of education, and Massachusetts is the birthplace of education, in 1635, the first school here in Boston, Boston Latin School, was established. And in Massachusetts had the first school system in 1837. But prior to the Civil War, which was in 1861, only one southern state, and that was North Carolina, had a comprehensive system for white people. So if there were only one system for whites, think about what that meant for Blacks. Next slide, please. So when we look at the Reconstruction, it brings us right to the Reconstruction era. And the Reconstruction era was from 1863 to 1877. And there was a period during and after the Civil War that was meant to address all the social, economic, and political issues that plagued Blacks, and also to solve the issue of readmitting the 11 states that seceded during the Civil War. Next slide, please. Now, during Reconstruction, you had some monumental legislation passed, believe it or not. You had 3 amendments were passed at that time. It was the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the ratification of the 14th Amendment, which defined citizenship to include all people born and naturalized in America, as well as the 15th Amendment, which extended the voting right to all male citizens, regardless of race or prior condition of servitude or slavery. You had 2 Civil Rights Acts passed, and again, this was news to me. One in 1866 and one in 1875, again, granting citizenship and equal rights for Blacks. And the last one in 1875 prohibited the practice of segregation. And this actual act, the Civil Rights Act of 1875, was actually ruled unconstitutional in 1883 by the Supreme Court. Next slide, please. Now, during the Reconstruction era, you saw a lot of atonement for past ills. And for Blacks in slaveholding states, they saw education as a step to advance themselves and progress themselves in society as it pertained to achieving a sense of equality, independence, and prosperity. And so we're looking at roughly a 14, 15-year period in which you saw Black legislators in the South. You saw small, vibrant Black communities rising in the South, as well as, typical some freedoms, quote unquote freedoms in the North. But this was all short-lived due to the advent of the Jim Crow laws. Next slide, please. And when you hear the word Jim Crow, people think it's an actual person. And what Jim Crow is actually a racial system which operated primarily in the southern and border states between 1877 and the mid-1960s. And what the Jim Crow laws were, they represented a legitimization of anti-Black racism. It excluded Blacks from public transport and facilities, serving on juries, employment opportunities, as well in the neighborhoods in which Blacks could live. And it had the following beliefs: that whites were superior to Blacks in all important ways, but also it had the notion that if you treat Blacks as equals, it would encourage interracial unions, which makes you really ponder the thought process of folks. But I think that last tenet here is so important. It was a method of social control, usually through violent means, both real and threatened. Next slide, please. So as we say, it lasted, the Reconstruction era lasted roughly about 14 or 15 years. In 1877, we saw the end of Reconstruction. That was with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, our 19th president. And what we saw during this time also is that the amendments that were passed, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, as well as the Civil Rights Acts that were all passed and ratified, were blatantly ignored. And so this paved the way to increase the application of all the Jim Crow laws throughout the South and our southern border states, as well as some of our northern entities. In 1896, there was a landmark case, Plessy versus Ferguson, in 1896. And what that entered, it undermined the constitutional protections of Blacks, which legitimized all the Jim Crow laws. And what it was, it set up the separate but equal doctrine that we would just promote segregation by having equal facilities, equal schools, equal accommodations, public accommodations for both whites and Blacks. And as we all know, that fell far short of intentions. Next slide, please. So the Supreme Court's decision in Plessy versus Ferguson case did establish, as it pertains to schools, separate schools for Blacks and whites. And back in, up until not too long ago, blacks were called colored. So they opened up colored schools, and they were no way near financed to the extent of white schools. They lacked all needed resources, books and the such. And since they lacked space as well, which led to overcrowded classrooms. And one unique feature that Black schools had, it was multi-graded, where you had teachers, usually in one or two-room classrooms, they taught toddlers to early teenagers. And so with this new rush to get educated into these Black schools, we saw the establishment of Black teacher colleges, such as Howard University in DC, Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, as well as Morehouse College, which is in Atlanta. Next slide, please. So that brings us up until 1954, where we had another landmark case of the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, which led to the integration of public schools, and that became the law of the land from the Supreme Court. And the intent of this court decision was to provide educational opportunities to all children. Obviously, this did not sit well with southern and border states in the South. Next slide, please. This is a very unique map because what we were talking about up until the Brown versus Topeka case was intentional segregation across our southern tier, as well as some of our northern tier states as well, in environments as well. But I picked this map out. This is actually a map of 2012. And what it shows you is that the schools are more segregated today than they were back in the 1950s. As you get to the light colors, the darker colors are schools in which you have Black majority enrollments. And look where they primarily are along that southern tier. And when you look at the dots as you go north, those are more our urban centers. And as you range across the country, wherever you see a Black mark, it is usually an urban center. But looking at this map really tells you about inclusion, about integration, about some of the things that we talk about coming together. And we're talking about an instance in which our schools are more segregated from that decision in 1954. 66 years later, we haven't progressed. Next slide, please. Now, I can read a lot of these to you, but this is what the research says about when we talk about equity of outcomes for our students. The first two bullets primarily deal with income inequities of families, with median and market-based income and how many children are living with respect to concentrated poverty. But I want to point out that third bullet. It says there are close connections between education inequalities and economic inequalities cast doubt on the assertions that America provides equality of opportunities that promotes social mobility. And when we talk about, the opportunities, America is the land of opportunity. We look back on a history of Black people for over 400 years. And the question becomes, how do we profess to live under that doctrine when we are still facing the same issues that we face in my lifetime, being of age 58, that I've seen throughout my lifetime, as well as my grandmother's lifetime, who unfortunately died in her mid-80s. And we're talking about the same issues. I also want to point out the fourth bullet about achievement gaps. Achievement gaps by social class have grown substantially since the 1960s, especially between children at the highest end of the income distribution of all others. And that tends to go towards Black and other brown children and families. Next slide, please. I'd like to also look at that last bullet here, and again states that rigorous research demonstrates that inequalities in both opportunity and outcomes along the lines of race and social class begin early and often persist throughout a student's K-12 years and beyond, and that they are much larger in the United States than in comparable countries. And this was just a study in 2015. And so the question becomes, again, when we talk about a society that talks about equality, talks about equity, we're in 2020 and we're still having issues that we actually had in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Next slide, please. And so the question becomes, how do we try to work towards equity? And these are just a few of countless options. One, obviously, look for alternative means to fund schools. Here in Boston, obviously, we have over 53,000 students. A lot of need here in Boston, but we compare what we spend on students with an expenditure per pupil. It almost pales in comparison to some of our suburban communities. Increase volunteerism. If you have the opportunity to volunteer, giving your time, talents, and even some of your treasures, greatly appreciated. We believe that the front loading of all supports during the early education years, that means all our social emotional supports should be front loaded. all the research indicates children who can read at that by third grade level and on level are usually successful going through the K-12 strata. But when we are lacking in those early education support systems and procedures, our students suffer. And increased parent engagement, one of the most crucial aspects of student success. Engage school personnel in culturally competent professional development activities. Here in Boston, we have students of color, and I'll go by just our school alone. Our school has a 97% enrollment of students of color, but yet our faculty does not reflect that. And that is something that is not only unique to this school or the Boston Public Schools, it's a unique phenomenon across the country. Identify implicit bias by school personnel and effectively deal with it. Engage diverse groups in tough conversations. Understanding actually leads to educating folks. And also provide access and opportunities such as this for engaging in interactive activities that cross racial and social economic boundaries. So these are just a few things that were of mine. But again, as I said, it was a brief history of how we got to where we are today. And if folks have any questions, next slide, please. Feel free to definitely put them in the Q&A section of the Zoom. Here is my email. Please feel free to reach out to me at any given time. And I just want to thank everyone for providing me the opportunity in the forum to speak to you tonight. So thank you.
Great job, Kevin. Thank you very much. A lot of information there, some great history, and great suggestions on that last slide too. I think we should all take another look at that afterwards. Don Wang is our next speaker.
Yes, hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining here. And it is my pleasure today to introduce Jasmin Eldridge. And he is Jim Eldridge is actually our Acton resident for many years. And he serves as the state senator for the Middlesex and the Worcester districts since January 2009. He also served on a number of committees, and either as chair or as a vice chair. And he is a leader on many progressive issues. He's also a very strong supporter to many local organizations. And two of them I personally worked with. One is Acton-Boxborough Cultural Council. He has been very involved, supportive, and attend every year our receptions. And the second involvement is his support to Chinese, Acton Chinese language schools. He attend the events, give seminar, and always be having good dialogue with our residents. And we really appreciate the opportunity to have him here today. And he's going to talk about his conversation with the Black residents in his district. He's also going to talk about his work in social justice. Let's welcome Jim Eldridge.
Great, thank you so much, Dawn, and so honored to be part of this distinguished panel. Really appreciate Kevin McCaskill's presentation. And I want to thank the Acton Chinese American Civic Society in the town of Acton for putting on this forum on Black Lives Matter, diversity, and justice. And I won't go into too much detail, but hopefully folks have seen that the legislature is taking action around racial justice. 2 weeks ago, we made Juneteenth a state holiday, celebration began in Texas for freed Black slaves after the Emancipation Proclamation by President Lincoln. And then this past Monday, we passed a police reform racial justice bill that I happen to think is very comprehensive. We had a 17-hour debate on the bill and look forward in different venues to highlight the different aspects of that bill. But in terms of tonight's discussion, given that ACACS has a focus, and I'm seeing a lot of participants are Chinese American or Asian American, which is wonderful to see. I want to talk a little bit about my experience because I grew up in Acton. You know, when I grew up in Acton and went through the public schools, the class size was 273 graduating seniors from Acton-Boxborough Regional High School. Of those 273, there were probably 3 or 4 Black students and probably 7 to 10 Asian American students. So very little diversity back then. And just because we're at a time where we really want to be sort of upfront about, you know, what kind of racism has existed in our country's history. You know, I played on the basketball team. One of my fellow players was Chinese American, and you know, every player had a nickname on the team. Interestingly, my nickname was the Senator, so I guess there was a plan for me. But disgracefully, the Chinese American basketball player, his name was the Rice Man. So, you know, I had not much awareness about how offensive that term was, but that was the term that he was called back then. And so I think it's really important to highlight that, you know, there are issues of discrimination in Acton and Boxborough, including the schools. We really need to do our best to combat them. I'm impressed with the efforts from everyone from the Acton Police Chief to Town Manager Jasmin and Girardi, to obviously school committee and Board of Selectmen and, you know, many other volunteers. But, you know, there's been discrimination against students of color, residents of color, you know, our country's history, and it exists now. And specific to the Asian American community, you know, obviously now in the schools, you know, some of our elementary schools are well over 1/3 Asian American. I'm very proud to represent a very diverse district, and hopefully I have a reputation for reaching out to all different immigrant groups, all different communities of color, Latino, Black, Asian American, Muslim American, but there's always more to do. So, you know, please be in touch with my office. I do want to highlight that, you know, and sort of bring this up, given that there's a focus from the Chinese American community, is that, you know, I think that there, like every group, there are differing opinions around different movements, and, you know, sort of highlight the bigger concept, which is a worldwide problem of anti-Blackness. And, you know, what that is that unfortunately, you know, almost every nationality, every group in the world, that there is a particular level of discrimination against Black people. And I've seen this in, you know, my travels to many countries. And I think it's important to acknowledge because it is something that I think is important for a discussion broader within the Asian American community. And, you know, just a couple of examples just about, you know, tension I've seen, and again, is a recognition that every ethnic group has a variety of opinions. But when there was a proposal 2 years ago to make Acton a safe community from immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, you know, there was a sizable number of Chinese American residents that did come to that hearing in opposition to that proposal. When I spoke at a church about, you know, my policy to protect immigrants, mostly people of color, you know, there was a protest outside that church with a significant percentage of Chinese Americans. On the other side of the sort of, you know, divide within the community, there was incredible support for that policy to make Acton a safe community with the Asian American community. It's been wonderful to see Asian Americans at Black Lives Matter protests, standing up in solidarity to support Black residents in Acton. So there's definitely a diversity of views, but I think it's important to have that discussion because what I would submit at the state level is that the fact that we had a 17-hour debate on a police reform racial justice bill after 3 days of delay, you know, that's not something that's happened to any other bill in the legislature. And I would submit that there's still a lot of challenges, again, for white residents in Massachusetts about getting over that prejudice and that level of discrimination. And I think, you know, part of the question for the Asian American community is, you know, how involved is the Asian American community, and, you know, hopefully standing in solidarity with other people of color. And I think there's sometimes where that's happened, but there's sometimes when it hasn't happened. So, so I just wanted to raise that because we have a terrific audience tonight. And in terms of my discussions with Black residents in Acton and Boxborough, I have had some great Zoom conversations, first of all, with alumni of color, mostly Black students and some Latino students, talking about the fact, and I think Kevin made reference to this in the Boston public schools, the Acton and Boxborough public schools have very few teachers of color. I know there's a plan by the school district to change that, but certainly the students I talk to really want quicker action to happen on that. There's a push on better curriculum to really reflect the country's true history of racism, to add that into the public schools. There's certainly been discussion, with the police. I would, state that there are, Black families, Black residents in Acton and Boxborough who have talked to me about sometimes being pulled over by the police and, not knowing for what reason they were. So, that needs to be brought up as well. And so these students were raising those issues. My observation is that in speaking to, Black residents, which I would note includes a very large African immigrant and Caribbean immigrant population, is that there's a general sense that Black residents feel fairly welcome in Acton and Boxborough. I think it's generally positive, but when you peel off some of the layers of the onion, there are conversations about students who are in the AP class, and the white student says to that Black student, "Oh, I didn't know you were in the honors class." A Black student on the tennis team, and a white student saying, "Oh, geez, I just didn't think you'd play tennis. I figured you'd play basketball." Residents talking about, being pulled over sometimes by the police in Acton and Boxborough. And I think a general sense that when they walk into the Acton public schools, when they walk into, different institutions in Acton, they're not seeing people look like them, and, how do we change that? So have really had some excellent discussions on that. I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I know that the alumni of color, again, mostly Black and Latino graduates of Acton-Boxborough Regional High School, have formed an organization. I forget the exact name, but they formed an organization to focus on these issues. So that's wonderful to see. And I would just say as a white legislator, as a white person, I have a lot to learn. I certainly have been advocating very strongly around racial justice, around police reform, around protecting immigrants. But I have a lot to learn, and look forward to learning more, including as part of this panel. And again, honored to be on this panel with Kevin, with Kyra, who I'm really congratulate her being elected, and really want to praise Lovingsky, Jasmin, who's done an amazing job organizing Black Lives Matter Acton. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So John, we'll go to the next speaker. Kyra, can you put the slides of Kyra's? Thank you. And Kyra, you're going to do the controlling of the slides?
Yes, so I can go on ahead and put up my slides.
Quick introduction here, yeah. It's my pleasure today to introduce Kyra Cook, and she was our brand new school committee members. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, she has lived in Acton for 7 years, and she has 2 sons in McCarthy Town School. And she has been very involved in the community. She's actually a member of the Superintendent's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion group. And she actually is also a writer, I learned, and has also experienced teaching in Boston public school. So she has a lot of great experience, and welcome, and thank you for supporting us tonight.
Absolutely. Can everybody see my slides? I hope so, yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant, good. I just want to make sure before I get started. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just so grateful to be a part of this conversation. As I was introduced, my name is Kyra Wilson Cook. I'm a 7-year resident of Acton. My husband and I moved here so that we could enroll our 2 sons, Alex and Theo, in the schools. I am very happy McCarthy Town mom, and I was recently elected to the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee. I also sit on the Superintendent's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Group. I'm honored to serve the families of Acton-Boxborough and represent the over 5,000 students who attend our schools. I ran because I believe every child in our district, regardless of their race, deserves representation in our school governance. I'm grateful to be invited to be part of this evening's conversation. Living as people of color in the United States means that racism will inevitably touch our lives at some point. There are likely similarities in experience among the speakers and the listeners of this panel. And talking about racism isn't easy, and engaging with other people's painful stories can be challenging. I'm especially grateful that you've come looking to learn more about the experiences of Black people living here in town. I hope that after this is over, the conversation will continue. My job as a member of the committee is to listen to the needs of our families. I will note here that I'm speaking this evening in my capacity as a mother and a fellow Acton resident, and not in my official capacity as a school committee member. I'm gonna go to the next slide. I've been asked to discuss my experiences as an African-American woman living here. I originally hail from Maryland. I'll start there because my upbringing shaped how I view the world, for better and for worse. Then I'll discuss my experiences here in Massachusetts. Finally, I'll speak about how my worldview will affect my work on the school committee. When speaking about the Black experience, many people assume an urban inner city life. I have always lived in the suburbs. There are a lot of Black people in the United States who have lived this way, out in suburbs like Acton and Boxborough. This is not a unique experience. It's just not the experience that's always portrayed in popular media. I'm a third-generation college-educated African-American woman. Members of my family received doctorates, master's degrees, and bachelor's degrees. Kevin mentioned Hampton University. I was third-generation Hamptonian until I transferred to UMBC, so I'm grateful for the shout out to Hampton. Going to college was never a question in my life. It was the expectation. And my sister and I were surrounded by educated people and by high expectations. I went to school with kids from all sorts of racial and socioeconomic backgrounds. Because of the school district where I grew up, I had access to exceptional institutions. However, as I rose through the grades, I found myself separated from other Black students. In most of my gifted and talented honors and AP classes, I was the only Black student or one of only a handful. As I'm hearing more from students of color here in AB schools, I'm learning that they are having similar experiences. They live in families who have high expectations for them. We're a town with a wide range of socioeconomic statuses. However, tracking quickly separates students in the middle school and high school, and some Black and brown students are finding themselves isolated from their peers if they reach the more challenging classes. My big takeaway from my childhood training is how to endure a life full of moments of subtle, non-aggressive, but still hurtful racism. How long can you go before death by 1,000 cuts? Being a Southerner means that you quickly learn the symbols of obviously aggressive racism: Confederate flags, white hoods, Nazi symbols. I was called the N-word for the first time when I was 13 years old. But growing up in a fully mixed space means noticing the subtle aggressions. Sure, there are the normal schoolyard taunts of children. You can see me here in what were called the Whoopi Goldberg braids that I had when I was in grade school. And I was called an Oreo, so, you know, Black on the outside, white on the inside. But it's really the surprise of watching someone's face churn when I start speaking that I was taught to notice. The compliment of how well I speak. There was the woman who, after a sleepover, said with relief, "You're so clean. It's so good to know you brush your teeth." Learning how to code switch was a skill I learned and perfected as early as I could. To code switch means to be able to change my use of language and even my accent based on what group of people I'm with. My talent was learning how to be in white spaces, Black spaces, mixed spaces, moving between them seamlessly as possible, and dealing with the evening train, it would seem. The major difference between Maryland and Massachusetts is that there aren't any Confederate flags flying in Massachusetts. So I never quite know when I'm walking into a place where I'm not welcome. The clues are hidden, and that can actually be very scary. In the beginning, there were times when I drove to a place, walked into a building, watched shock turn to dismay, turn to anger, and walked out realizing I was lucky to be okay. Navigating life here means accepting my status as a New Englander. I've learned to keep my y'all, but lose other parts of myself. I've learned to lean into my uniqueness, starting sentences with, as the only Black person in the room, so as to disarm with humor, but never lean too far into it. One of the unexpected experiences I've had being a Black person here in Massachusetts is the feeling of disconnection from my cultural community. Segregation is a real thing here. This means that we aren't all having the same experience, and it's difficult to get together, share stories, and feel the comfort of sameness and togetherness in community. Though we live in a town that is well-meaning and attempts to be progressive in policy, being a super minority in town means that being in a crowd in our small town can still be a solitary affair. For context, this is a good time to remind you of some of the demographics of Acton. In 2019, according to the US Census Bureau estimates, Acton was 69% white, 25% Asian, and only 1.7% Black. Now, it's tough to be the only in a room, and I'm saying that as an adult. You might be able to empathize, but imagine being a kid. Imagine being a teen. Imagine being the only kid and your teacher is white and your principal is white and all the counselors are white and everyone in the administration is white and everyone in the school board is white. Who do you turn to when you need something? How do you give a full-throated, honest reply to how are you doing? How is school treating you? I joined the superintendent screening committee in 2018 because I saw that we are a small suburban school district with challenges similar to major urban school systems. I wanted to make sure we found a superintendent who understood that, and I think we did. I love Acton because it's dynamic and it's changing. I understand that my children benefit when they learn alongside children who live different experiences and have a different worldview. The world isn't all white, and neither is Acton, and its representatives shouldn't be either. I think it's important that our children of color see adults in decision-making positions who look like them. I benefited from this as a child. It shapes who I am. I also think that white children in our town should see people of color in decision-making positions. They need to see the world fully so that when they leave Acton, they aren't surprised. I come to this position in good faith because I think that the school district approaches this conversation in good faith. We're at a crossroads as a town. How we approach these big conversations and heavy decisions will have significant ramifications on our students for years to come. I don't think the district takes that lightly. I think that the leadership wants to be challenged so that they can see a wider picture and make better decisions. This is hard work, but I believe that the children of Acton are worth it. I just watched Vivian Burshall's show Wide Field, featuring a panel of Black students of the high school. Some of the things that were said in that panel broke my heart. The one that hurt the most was, I feel like people don't like us. It hurts my heart to think that any child, but especially a child in the minority, walks into our school buildings every day convinced that people don't like her and her peers because of the color of her skin. That's a significant problem. I want to make sure that's changed. One of the most frustrating problems here in Acton is a failure to communicate. I've observed a significant disconnect between residents in town and the people who run it. This is a challenge of accessibility and communication. I plan to use my term on the committee to craft consistent, sincere opportunities for community members to meet with our leadership. I think that evenings like this, and this evening especially, are a great way to start. I want to challenge our town to name the obvious inequities that exist here in town and take bold action to counter them. For example, creating a Black student union at the high school may be an exclusive thing to do, but in my opinion, it's the right thing to do. I think that we should honor the needs that our students identify and do our best as adults and decision makers to provide and fill in the gaps. 2020 has been a straining year. Many systems and structures in the United States are under considerable pressure. We have seen buckling and breaking, but we've also seen opportunities for real change that can make a difference for our future. Racialized state-sanctioned brutality is not coming with us in a post-COVID-19 world. Neither is economic injustice or an education system lacking in nuance, sophistication, and responsiveness. But building a better world, the world that we want and the world that we need, takes work. For Black people in communities like Acton and beyond, that work has been a lifetime struggle. It's difficult to express, but each day I experience moments where I feel I have to prove that I am fully human. And I've long felt this. The work that our community must do will be a marathon. It took multiple generations to get here. Unfortunately, it will take a few generations to come. That doesn't mean it's not worth it. I know it's worth it because I've been lucky enough to benefit from the work that's already been done. My children benefit too. So do your children. So will our grandchildren, if we're lucky. This is worthy of our time. It is worthy of our lives. So if I can impart one thing from this presentation, it's please sustain the work. It's hard work, but it's good work and it matters. And the fact that you're all participating tonight shows me that it matters to you too. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Kyra, thank you very much for that very moving and inspiring presentation.
Thank you.
Just a reminder to folks that are watching, if you have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat functions of the Zoom and we will get to them shortly. So thanks again, and we will move to our next speaker. I am pleased, let me bring up the slides, sorry. Oh, sorry about that. So I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Lovingsky Jasmin. Mr. Jasmin is originally from Haiti. He has a bachelor's in international relations and a master's in religious studies. He is an organizer and he's a minister, and he's recently been accepted to serve the country as an Army chaplain. A few weeks ago rather, he started Black Lives Matter Acton with his son, his 5-year-old son. And he's joining us tonight to talk to us about that. And if you've driven through Kelly's Corner over the last few weeks, you should have seen several people out there. And that was much in part to some of the great work he's been doing in organizing. So, Mr. Jasmin, please share with us some of your experiences, and welcome to the forum.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone on the panel for sharing your experience and everything with us. And I've learned a lot with you. I am married with a beautiful lady, Sophia Jasmin. We have a son that I think everyone should meet. He is only 5, so we have a really nice, beautiful life with Jeremiah and his family. As you just pointed out, I'm from Haiti. I grew up in a country that knows all kinds of hardship, social, economics, politics, etc. All of this shaped me and helped me to become the person I am today. Among all I've gone through in my life, there's one thing I've never experienced until I moved to the United States of America. I think everyone can fill in the blank. Yes, it's racism. My father moved to the US as a boat people. After all the dismays and deceptions, it took him 22 years to get all of us to the land of the free. We are on the land of the free. I'm so happy for that. The land of the free is the nickname of America. It is written at the end of all 4 stanzas in the national anthem. The hypocrisy of that is the land of the free had slaves on the plantation when Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner in 1814. Francis was a devout believer whose Bible says, love your neighbors as yourself. We are created in the image of God, and we are one body in union with Jesus. But still he owned slaves and stood against the abolition of slavery. Nobody can really speak about the abolition of slavery without referencing Haiti, the first Black republic that fought the colonialists, and as a consequence is forced to pay an equivalence of $21 billion to preserve its independence. Haiti paid for defeating the greatest armed force of the time. Thomas Jefferson, who was the US president, knew the emancipation of the slaves in Haiti can be a potential cause of upheaval of the slaves in the US. He attempted to suppress the revolution by refusing to recognize Haiti's independence, to prevent the social, economic, and political evolution of Haiti. The US set embargoes and occupied Haiti for 19 years, from 1915 to 1934. Julia Garfield, an associate professor at Washington State University, wrote an article in the Washington Post saying, Haiti, the first nation to permanently ban slavery and the slave trade from the first day of its existence. The bold act of Haiti to overthrow slavery and colonialism reverberated around the world, forcing slave-holding nations like Britain and France. She didn't include the US in the list, and she should have, to come face to face with the contradiction of their own enlightenment. Many would now like to forget this reckoning. The church at large was and is a dominant force in US history. It constituted a shelter and welcoming place for white supremacy. The Catholic Church played a critical role in the transatlantic slave trade. We have the issue today where we're celebrating Christopher Columbus, who's supposedly the first to discover America. How is that even possible when there are Egyptian artifacts in North America? Archaeologists have in their possession instances of skulls and skeletons that most likely belonged to African descent. Not only that the church was the backbone of the slave trade, but also most of the slave masters were devoted Christians. The white church in America did not accept any slave in their midst. Therefore, Black people could not, for any reason, step into the church sanctuary. Blacks were not regarded as human beings because for the white church leaders, these creatures don't have souls. It's in this perspective that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote his famous book, The Souls of Black Folk. The founding fathers of this nation envisioned to keep a straight line between Black and white and an ongoing order of superiority. Abraham Lincoln did not hide his position, saying there is a physical difference between the white and the Black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together. While they do remain together, there must be a position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. Well before Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson said, I advance it, therefore, as a suspicion only that the blacks, whether originally and a distinct race or made distinct by time or circumstances, are inferior to the white in the endowment of both body and minds. This segregation and inferiority of the black race compared to the white race also take root in the attribution of certain representation of the colors, black and white. White represent purity and righteousness, and God is dressed in a white robe. But black represent falsity, impurity, ignorance, and the devil is black. As the devil is the adversary of God, therefore the black race becomes automatically the opponent of the white race. It is this image that embodied in the mind of so many who hate black people. Some are considered to be progressive, they don't hate black people, but the alternative is to be colorblind. This theory is as bad as the attribution theory presented above. The intent of pushing colorblindness theory is to impose everyone to see everything as white. Therefore, if another race doesn't see things the way it's presented by the white race, you become the enemy. We see some people, especially black folks, in their naivety, ignore their skin color to emphasize their identity that is in Christ Jesus. Well, if your color becomes one with your identity, you may be right, but everyone knows there's a clear contrast between who you are as presented in human characteristic, or for Christians, God's characteristics, and the color of your skin. You will not see a white person ignore his or her skin color, because the world doesn't teach white people to be ashamed of their skin color, but it rather offers them all kinds of privileges just for being white. It is written in the Constitution of the United States of America that all men are created equal, but the facts clearly show it is interpreted to be limited exclusively to the white circle. This inequality and plain acts of racism that are revealed today on social media revolve the conscience of our allies to join in this long-fought battle that lasts more than 4 centuries. I started Black Lives Matter, acting to raise the citizens' awareness to speak against injustice, police brutality, and racism in our communities. I am so delighted to see everybody's involvement, especially our steering committee, and the willingness to change our communities into a more welcoming place to Black and people of color. There is something I want to emphasize and make clear to everyone. If you want to see a real change, you must not be afraid to make decisions that will offend those who tactically and purposefully join the movement just to prevent any change in a very soft and peaceful way. Those are the real enemies of change. If our leaders believe changes will occur without affecting the oppressor's mindset, then there will be nothing done. We, the people, must continue to advocate for real change. We must not accept to put for tomorrow what can be done today. We have waited and suffered for too long. The time for change is now. Don't think it's too small or it will be more beneficial to focus on something greater. That's good too. But sometimes it's better to do baby steps. than to make a leap that destroys everything after almost a month and a half that people all over the United States have been protesting to request changes. What are the things our towns have already decided to implement? I see the State House was working on a bill to reform the police system. What have you done personally as a citizen to influence a change at all levels? Remember, this system of oppression is not broken. It's working the way it was intended to work. Now, together, we have to intentionally double and even quadruple our working pace to eradicate this system that is profound and negatively fruitful. We've seen a lot of critics from those who want the system to remain the same. Don't lose focus. They have all the reasons to promote the motto, if it's working, don't change it. It's working to the detriment of another group, the Black people. So you will hear them say blue lives matter, Black all lives matter. Unfortunately, they don't have the decency to accept that human beings can't continue to be treated less than animals in the 21st century, regardless of race and color. What should do now matter? All lives will not matter until Black lives matter. Thank you.
Lovingsky, thank you very much for the moving information you just presented. And it's a great segue to some of the things you mentioned to, before we move into the question and answer section of the program, I wanted to share with folks the plans for the next session. As all of our speakers have said today, conversations like this are important and they shouldn't just be a one-off thing that we do one night. And there are plans for another similar session 2 weeks from today on the 29th. And the second session will be a follow-up conversation, and it will include some other members of our community, John Benson from the town selectmen, Tammy Govea, our state representative, Sananda Sahai, the Indian American artist and co-founder of Essence of India, Dan Sena, our newest state representative, who was just elected very recently, and our deputy police chief, Jim Cogan. So that's coming up next week, or 2 weeks rather, and we'll have a similar format and registration process, so stay tuned for that. And so now we have an opportunity. We've heard some very great historical context from Kevin, and some ongoing issues that are happening statewide and in our community from our senator. We've heard a great story of moving from Maryland to here from Kyra, and a lot of work that Lovingsky's doing with Black Lives Matter. And now's the time for folks in the audience to ask any questions, and we'd ask you to do that by entering them into the chat functions of Zoom, and then we will distribute them to the speakers. So, Don, is there one that you wanted to push forward? Getting some great, I don't know if the panelists can see, but there's a lot of compliments on all of your presentations are in the chat. Not too many questions, but a lot of compliments, so that's good.
Yes, and thank you all for the positive feedbacks here. I think I only saw 5 open questions. I think the first one is, seems like housing segregation supports a lot of these problems. Like ending that would help a lot. Yes. I wonder if who would be this one best direct to. And is this for you, John, or this is for Jamie, Senator Eldridge? I think Senator Eldridge has to leave, so do we have the right person here to address this question about the housing segregation support?
I think it's an interesting observation, and it's something that we should look into. Absolutely. So that's a good question. I don't know that I have the answer personally.
I think this is related to Kevin's presentation, right?
Oh.
To school problems. Kevin, do you have something to add on to this question?
Well, I believe the question really fits in when we look at a city such as Boston, which is gentrifying by the year, in which it is truly outpricing the vast majority of Black and brown residents here, in which they actually have to flee to other communities such as New Bedford and Fall River and Brockton. And so housing, and again, it's a way, we're going the way of San Francisco, where we are just outpricing all our current Black and brown residents. So it does have a sense of segregation, which only a particular demographic can purchase homes, whereas you have other folks who can't even afford the rents here in Boston. So I really think obviously gentrification. I live here right in Roxbury. I can recall living in Springfield and knowing what Roxbury was like in the 80s and the 90s. And it is not the Roxbury of 20 years ago, in which you had a predominantly Black community, which is now, really in all essence of the conversation, flipping to white as we speak. And again, it is simply moving everything south here in Boston. It's an interesting dynamic, and it does. I mean, it's when you have $1 million properties here in Roxbury. What is that telling you? So I really think the question, and it ties in to schools and that, because they aren't sending their students to school, their children to school here in Boston. And if they are, it's the private schools or the METCO program. So yeah, it does play a part. Great question.
I'd like to add that, one of the major, another major difference between Maryland and Massachusetts is that the major unit of government is of local government is your county, not your town. So I attended Montgomery County Public Schools. This meant I could live in Silver Spring, but get the same kind of quality education that the kids in Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Potomac were getting. So it was, it was an excellent education and part of an excellent system. And even if I wasn't in the richest part of the county, and that matters because it allows more kids to have access to those resources. So just by making the borders of every school system so very small and so very limiting, we limit the access to education. And it feels to me, as a person who's not from here, really not personal, but just very purposeful in the way that was built. And so it's frustrating because I'm not sure that would ever change. But it seems to me that being able to make a larger region of schools and school districts would make it easier for more kids to have access to a great education and would combat that segregation.
All right, thank you. And before I move to the next question, there are a number of people who ask whether we can make the slides available. And so that's for Kevin and Kyra. Are you comfortable to share them to the audience?
Sure, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Those are excellent presentations. And also regarding the webinar, the whole recording, I believe, and Mark said we're going to make it available, right, in 24 hours. So I guess we can listen this again if I'll share to the friends. And so let's go down to the next questions here. And the next question is from anonymous one. What changes or could Acton or Boxborough do at the local level to make the town more welcoming, inclusive, and engaging to minorities? This is another excellent questions. So John, maybe you can talk some of the work initiative we have in place.
Sure. Yeah, I think that That's a challenge that we've been working on, and it's certainly something that we have a lot of work to do. And I think nights like this, where we're learning more about people's experiences in the community and in communities like Acton, help us to better plan and understand what things we can do. I know the Board of Selectmen in Acton has shown some leadership in as recently as Monday night or earlier this week, established our goals for the year. And the top goal of the whole process was to pursue efforts to work on equity and racial, improving racial equity in our community. And there was actually another goal related to looking at housing and if there's any discrimination in housing. So it's definitely, there's a commitment from our local leadership, which is great. Our Board of Selectmen has made this a priority, and I look forward to working on it with them and with our community this year. And I think our guests tonight on the program may have some suggestions, and I think we've already learned from them already from their presentations. So I think we have a lot to work with.
Okay, thank you, John. And also for the audience, I think that the next session 2 weeks from now, and we'll have more discussion on that front. I think we'll have John Benson from the town selectmen will come to give the first presentation. I think this question can also be asked then. And there's also other effort by the residents and by the state reps, and they will cover some of the current effort or policies. All right, thank you. Let's move to the next questions. And basically, I think next one is more asking to have the slide. So this one already being answered, I believe. And the next one is also being answered. Let's move down. Let's go. So John, maybe you can check the next question. I'm having trouble. Yeah.
I have one here that says, Kevin, can you share your experience in your career pursuit?
Yeah, you know, I'm a transplant. I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, and I went to Paterson public schools throughout, and the schools were in dire disrepair. Paterson is a very poor city in New Jersey. And, you know, contrary to, you know, Kyra, I fit the stereotype, single mom, raised by a single mom, and really did the best she could. And I'm really proud of what my mother produced, because she was an outstanding mom, and she still remains that 80 years of age and still going strong. But I actually was for, you know, again, college, even though my mother and my grandmother did not go to college, my mother ended up going later on. It was instilled in me from day one, either you go to college or you're going to be out the house. So it was it was a kind of easy decision for me to come going on. By no means was education my field. You know, I was a mathematician by trade. Math was always, ever since being a child, I wanted to get something into, obviously, engineering or this computer science and the such. And I actually started out in private industry. I started at Mass Mutual. I went to Western New England, as I was stated earlier, got a degree in mathematics. And God forbid, every time you ask somebody, you know, you got a degree, what did you get it in, English or physical education? It was shocking to see their face when I said I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics. And it just throws their whole world around. But I worked in private industry at Mass Mutual for 3 years, and it was just not fulfilling. And Mass Mutual had a program in which they allowed you to leave work and tutor at the local one of the local high schools. It'd give you the afternoon off, and I love having afternoons off. So I would go and tutor at the high, and I just fell in love with it. And I actually left Mass Mutual, and 3 months later and started teaching in the Springfield Public Schools, where I taught for 6 years in middle school. I was an administrator for 16 in elementary, middle, and high school. I left there after 22 years and went to Hartford to work in central office, to work on a number of things, supervising principals, designing new types of schools and approaches to education. And this position at Madison Park opened up, and a friend of mine who had actually moved out here and was working in the Office of Human Capital said, you got to come out here and look at this. And, you know, Boston really needs what you have. And came in, I just said, because I know you, I'll just go for the interview, but I'm really satisfied where I'm at. Came to Boston and fell in love with the school itself and what Boston was proposing. So I've been here for 5 years, and obviously we'll be transitioning a role into central office at some point in time. But that's pretty much it. You know, a lot of support, understanding of having a lot of hands placed on me for support, reaching out. And, you know, to Lovingsky's point, you know, you always gonna face those obstacles and opposition at all costs. And I think it's a mindset that was instilled in me growing up in Madison, that, you know, you are tougher than your circumstances, that you can overcome all your obstacles and the such. And it has been that way for me for 58 years, you know, with 4 children and 3 grandchildren as well. You know, we try to instill that sense of power, that you are empowered to do great things and nothing can deter you from that but yourself. And that's pretty much been my experience in my career pursuits. And hopefully after going on 33 years in education, I know the time is coming soon to stop. But again, as long as I can keep breathing and have the passion and the really enthusiasm, you know, I'll continue to do this work.
Great.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, let's move on to the next questions. I think next question.
I think I would like to bring up this question. I think this is quite interesting. So the question asks about, there are several working groups on social justice issues, the school committee, the high school student group, Black Lives Matter in Acton, and now we have a new Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So is there any plan to coordinate those groups by bringing them together to enhance their efforts? I think that's a great question. So maybe I think John and maybe Kyra and Lovingsky, and you can talk about this.
Sure, I will. I'll defer. I've been answering a lot of questions.
John should answer this question. Because I only know about some of the stuff that's going on at school. And I just got here. So, but I know there's a lot going on, and I think it's a great question as to if we're coordinating, and the answer is we should if we're not. There should be a little coalition, a little conference in a post-COVID world, I hope, because it's important, and the more that we can coordinate, and so that we can tackle, my father used to say, with these kind of big problems, you have to eat it like an elephant, one piece at a time, and there are so many great organizations, and we're tackling this big, huge thing, so we just need to take it, just little pieces by pieces, and we can do that because there's so many of us now. It's a beautiful thing. So, John, if we're not coordinated, we should. And
I think whether or not we're coordinated, I think the fact that there are multiple conversations at this time is a very positive thing, and certainly any opportunities to coordinate would be helpful. But I think it's great that there are many different people that are interested in different formats to help and try to advance this issue. I don't know if Lovingsky, if you have anything to add on that front.
Yeah, I was gonna say that Black Lives Matter Acton, we just started, so it's about almost a month and a half since we started. So we are learning about the community, and connecting with other groups. I've already met with some of those groups. So this morning I met one of the students. So we will find a way to work together. We already make some propositions of how we can work together, and things they've already worked on. And we will, work together on them, and probably things we will be doing in the community. We'll invite them. I met with Emmy as well. So I started meeting with, different groups now. So maybe some of them that they mentioned on the Q&A question list, I don't know them. If there's a way to connect me with them, I'm willing to connect with them, and maybe we can do something together and have all of them together. It will be amazing to see all of these groups working together for the same purpose.
Thank you. Yeah, we have about 8 minutes left here. Let's just address a few more questions here. I think the next one, actually there are questions coming from both the chat and the Q&A, so we'll try to kind of balance that a little bit here. And there's another question regarding how can we get more teacher and administrator of color in the school if there is a shortage of graduate in this field. So who would be the best person to address it?
So I mean, I'll tackle it, but again, I'm brand new, and I'm not supposed to speak as in my capacity as a committee member, and really I can't, because I don't know all of the efforts that are being made. Though Superintendent Light has said on multiple occasions that this is important to the district, that plans are being put in place, that recruitment has happened and is active. So it is not lost on the district or on the committee or on the administration. I'm looking forward to being part of those efforts, I hope, as I go forward in my term. You know, I think there are Black teachers out there. I know I was one of them, and Kevin is one of them. You know, I think that, just speaking for me as a person of color who was a teacher candidate back in the day when I was studying in Baltimore, there was you know, you feel torn. You know, there are kids in the city, there were kids in Boston, there were kids in Baltimore, there were kids in Washington, D.C. Who I wanted to teach, who I thought deserved a highly educated Black teacher who wanted to be in that classroom with them. And you know what, for 4 years I did it in Boston, and I loved my time. I loved my time in Boston. But I think that those driven teachers, I think that suburban kids of all colors also deserve motivated Black teachers who want to be there too. They need to have that experience of a person of color in front of them, speaking with authority, telling them they got to do something, having those high expectations for them, being disappointed when they don't turn that thing in. There's just something about that relationship that's really important, and getting used to that at an early age. And so, you know, I remember being that teacher. And being that student teacher, and I did my student teaching in a suburban school, and so I think that we're out there. I think that figuring how to speak to that young teacher and say, yes, the urban school districts are looking for you and they need you, and if that's where you are called to be, then be there. But if you even have a question, if you think that you're being called to the suburban schools, we're here for you, and our kids deserve you too. I mean, that's what I would say if I were in an interview. And again, that's not me speaking as a committee member. That's me speaking as a former teacher and as a mom who has 2 boys who deserve Black teachers. That's what I would say to that young teacher.
All right, thank you, Kyra. And there are a few very good questions on the chat section. Let me pick a couple of them, and one of them from Vivian's. And it's any suggestion about how best to combat racism within the community of color, anti-Black, less among Asian Americans, and Blacks harboring Asian American because of the corona connections. It's a little wordy for me to say. So this is a little pretty big topic, so I don't know if we have enough time to address that. And it's a good question here. And so Jane, you have any good thoughts on this? I think this is this is the reason why we're having this event. I think we like to have a good education session here for broader audience, especially Chinese Americans, to get to hear more of real stories from local Black residents. I hope it helps us to appreciate.
I think this is we would like to hear from the speakers, from Kyra, maybe Kevin and John, and then to see if you have any thoughts on this.
Well, if I may, I think because it goes to one of the questions in the Q&A about, you know, what suggestions. I think exposure to each other's communities. It's something because I think we don't expose ourselves enough. For example, when there's an NAACP meeting, why don't we invite, you know, the Asian community in to have these types of sessions? And what, and similar to here, one of the things that we did, one of the activities we did with another school that has an all-white population, we did a student exchange program where we took 30 of our students and they had 30 of theirs, and we just exchanged the students for an entire day and staff members. And it was just, it was almost it was a revelation. It's cathartic for everybody. It was one of the greatest days in 33 years that I've seen in education, because there was such authentic learning and understanding going on. And I'm saying, if we can do that in a public school setting, you mean to tell me we can't do that in our vast communities here in Massachusetts? And I think that's create an opportunity for people to hear about the history of folks, hear about some of the culture, the customs, and what you believe in, because you'll see a lot of similarities of what we believe. We want the best for our children and the best opportunity to be successful in life. So again, just simply opportunities like here, create forums that we can all sit down and discuss all the issues that may separate them, because I guarantee we have a lot. Our two communities, the Asian community and Black communities, have a lot in common, more so than our differences.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's excellent answers. I do agree those kind of forum is an excellent place for us to know each other better and to appreciate each other's challenge more. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And there's another good question from the chat. Will this organizer of forum be waiting or able to take the lead in greater Boston Asian communities in Black Lives Matter information actions? And if so, where, what information will be disseminated? I think we are definitely open to share the video and the slides to all the participants, and feel free to pass. I guess we will have a second session to come in 2 weeks. And this is definitely a great start here. And we definitely will think about how we can make a more impact to extend the communities. Okay, and let's look at, it's a little harder for me to look at the new message here. I think that covered a lot of questions here. I think there's a couple of quick questions. We are actually right on the time. I think we did quite well covering a lot of questions. I think there's one maybe closing comments for the speaker, Kevin, Kyra, and Lovingsky, and ask you if you have maybe one suggestion, anything you think you can make our town better.
First, again, thank you for providing this forum for all of us and me personally. But I think any opportunity that I have, the opportunity to come out and speak up at Acton-Boxborough area and bringing some folks out there with us. And I would welcome you to come to Boston as well when we have certain events, because we definitely want to open those lines of communication to create the kind of communities and society that we want our kids to relish. So thank you.
Thank you. So I think with that, I think this concludes this session. John, any closing comments here? Yeah, I definitely appreciate everybody's time, and this is an excellent presentation and a great effort from everybody.
Yeah, thank you all.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you again for having us.
Absolutely.
No, this was really wonderful.
Yes,
and I guess my closing thought would just be, Acton is changing and it's dynamic and it's wonderful. And I'm proud to be here, and I'm proud to, be part of all of this. So just thank you so much for this opportunity.
Let me close by saying that, maybe when we first started Black Lives Matter Acton, I received an email from somebody who was living in Acton, and then he left because, all kind of racism and stuff like that, and discrimination. And then he sent me the text. He said that he is so happy and so joyful to see what Acton is doing. Now he's proud to say that he's from Acton. So you see, he wasn't proud to say that. Now, because of inclusion and how we are open to work together, so it gives him another, view of Acton. So that's what we are trying to create with Black Lives Matter Acton. Make it more welcome to everybody, and a peaceful area for everybody to work or to walk. And I don't want to be, to be afraid if I see a cop. I don't want my son to be afraid if he's working down the street and sees a cop. It's the same for all Blacks in the community. We don't want that to happen in Acton, and we don't want it to happen in other communities around. Because like you may make like Acton the best place to live, but the other town over you can't even cross. So that's why the effort must not only include Acton, it must include all the surrounding towns. And the work is like let's all the leaders, let's open be open to talk, be open to not just invite people and you talk to them and you send them home and it's over, but be open to talk and make decisions to make better changes.
Thank you. So is John still here? I think we're perfectly on time here, right?
Yes. Wow. Very great job, everybody. This has been a very helpful night for everyone. I think we learned a lot and got to meet some of our members of our community. And thank you for allowing me to participate in this as well. Do you want to shut it down, Dawn?
Yes. Thanks everybody for making the time to attend today's meeting. And thanks all the speakers and all the organizers. And have a wonderful evening. Hope to see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
See you in 2 weeks.
See you.
Have a great night.
It was amazing.
Good night, everyone.